No one can fire my boss, so she does it herself. This isn't my story, but I was able to witness it in all its glory because I used to work for one of the people involved. Years ago, I used to work at a state government agency where my boss was a political appointee. Her mom was a bigwig in our governor's party who wrangled a political appointment for her daughter, which meant she had some clout behind her. Let's call her Shannon. Shannon was not good at her job. At all. She was frequently out of the office for meetings, for example, 2-hour lunches, coffee with friends, a bit of shopping. She was also a bully and a tyrant. She bullied her staff and would hold the threat of firing over everyone's heads to get them to do what she wanted. She wasn't a micromanager because she was never around enough to actually micromanage anything. And she was widely disliked throughout the entire building. This was a large agency, so to have a building where almost everyone disliked you took a lot of work. The problem is that, as a political appointee, she was untouchable. The people who had the power to fire her couldn't because of her family. Even the number 3 person in the agency couldn't do it, and he was a political appointee as well. But after a year of mystery meetings and time out of the office, her excuses were catching up to her. The agency director removed her from her job and put her in charge of special projects. Anyone who's worked in a corporate job knows that people get put in charge of special projects because they were largely incapable of doing their previous job. They didn't get fired, but they no longer had any power. This was Shannon's case. For a while, she seemed to get the message. She shaped up, didn't have any more mystery meetings, didn't disappear from the building for 2 hours, and treated people somewhat nicely. Of course, it didn't last and Shannon returned to her old ways. Around that time, we got a new assistant director, we'll call her Trisha, who was also a political appointee. She was the number 2 person in the whole agency, and she was great to work for. She was very serious about her job. She had access to Shannon's electronic calendar and saw what Shannon had been up to. She then cross-checked the security logs to see when Shannon was in and out of the building. After her brief investigation, Trisha emailed Shannon with a list of dates and said, "Can you tell me more about these different meetings you were having? And why they took so long?" I'm paraphrasing. Well, Shannon wasn't having any of that. How dare Trisha call her character into question? This was an outrage. It was so outrageous, in fact, that Shannon wrote a resignation letter and slammed it down on Trisha's desk. That'll show her. After a few hours, Shannon had time to think about what she had done. She remembered that she had a 1-year-old at home. She also remembered that her husband was an unskilled truck driver who made $8 an hour. Edit, he was a local delivery driver for a construction firm, not a CDA driver. And she remembered that she was the primary breadwinner for her family. She went back, hat in hand, and apologized for her attitude. She said she was willing to try harder, and she asked Trisha if she could please possibly have her letter back. Pretty please? Trisha said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're too late. I already processed the letter and sent it off to HR. I'm afraid I can't undo that." Do you remember in the movie, The Incredibles, when Mr. Incredible fought the giant ball with legs? The ball was so indestructible and powerful, the only thing that could beat it was itself. This was that moment. The previously untouchable political appointee had just been fired by the only political appointee who had that power, herself. And rather than protect her or do her a solid, Trisha would not undo her self-termination. She just let Shannon be her own undoing. When news of Shannon's self-firing raced through the building, you could hear the cries of "What? Are you serious?" followed by howls of laughter as each new person heard the story. Shannon was out and everyone who had to deal with her was much happier than they had ever been in that job. Now to the comments. This is like a fairy tale come true and told to children at bedtime. The tale of how Shannon shat the bed she slept in. This even sounds effective for potty training. I worked with a supervisor who would turn in her resignation as a way to get a pay raise. It worked for years, until we got a new director. A director who was not her buddy. The very first time she pulled this stunt he accepted and processed her resignation. When she came back to say she changed her mind and was staying, his response was, "Oh no, you tendered your resignation and have accepted it. Your position has been posted." I'm sorry, it worked for years. Years. It be like that. Sometimes someone manages to convince the boss that they are indispensable and irreplaceable and that losing them will be the downfall of the company because it would take a legion of new employees to replace them, and no one there to train them to do the job because only the one person can do it. Now, usually, in cases where the person is convincing people of this, it's not true. Whereas I've seen quite a few MCs in here where that was the case. But that's usually not the intention of the worker, but rather a shitty circumstance the boss hands them. However, at my old job there was a lady like this. Now, she does a decent job at the one thing she does. But in a restaurant where there is always something to be done, she refuses to do any other job or to help other areas when her position is slow. If she clears her area, she'll stand there and sip her coffee while watching the rest of us catch up. Sure, it would take time to replace her, but she's not the god she makes herself out to be. But she constantly would threaten to quit to get a raise or change in schedule or time off. And the boss would always cave. And she was rude and a hard ass and never satisfied with anyone else's work. She chased off so many employees and yet they keep her on. One manager said they had to get rid of her or her quit. They said they couldn't afford to lose her. He quit. They were surprised. Even I quit because of her. No matter how hard I tried, I could never live up to her expectations. I opened the restaurant and busted ass as the only person in the kitchen for 2 to 3 hours, putting the kitchen together, cooking and testing the food and making all the orders, and often helping out the service side too. And no matter what, she always had a handful of complaints about shit when she came in. The table is dirty, the wrappers aren't stocked to the brim, the coolers aren't fully stocked, the food trays aren't full. The bread isn't rotated and counted and timed or wasted, the order times are too high, though usually I was in the acceptable range, but she cheats the system and keeps them at unrealistically low levels. And it's never a "why isn't this done?" "Oh, you're busy? Okay." No. It was more like "I could do a better job than you. Why are you so awful at your job? I changed my hours so that I didn't have to do this kind of work. Why is it still not done when I come in? I don't want to do this." I got tired of her shit. She's so demoralizing. Reminded me of my mom so much. And now whenever I see her, sometimes I swing by to say to old co-workers or grab a bite, or I see her in town. She asks when I'm coming back because I'm the best and they haven't been able to find a good replacement and they had to hire 3 people to do what I did alone and it still doesn't hold up to her expectations. I just shrug and say, "Why didn't you ever say that when I still worked there? All you ever did was shit on me." And she's all like, "Well, I didn't mean it." And I said, "Sure sounded like it at the time." I don't get up at 3 a.m. every morning and bust ass alone in the kitchen just to wish to put every morning because you're tired and cranky. And I'm not coming back. She gave me a real sour face. I don't go down there anymore. But it's been 5 years and she's still there. The malicious compliance doesn't get much more perfect than that. Well written, too. Ain't it great when the trash takes itself out? Well said. Sounds like Shannon, if only for a moment, was a good boss at the very end, saving some legwork for Trisha. This kind of happened where I used to work. Also, government. She was so awful to everybody. Cried wolf so many times. Openly demeaned staff. constantly on her phone. Our metrics were very easy to meet, and she wouldn't even try, just get sour when someone called her out. She decided to quit her secure state government job, and got hired on at a small county office. She got fired within 2 weeks of working there, for irreconcilable differences outside of her control. Felt so good when I heard. Q. Jordan. She's not the first person to fire themselves. Casey Stengel, Baseball Hall of Famer as a manager of the Yankees, did it in the 1920s. After his major league playing career, he was president and player-manager with the Boston Braves minor league affiliate at a mid-level league, and got an offer to be a manager, at a higher salary, from the Giants affiliate at a higher-level league. But his boss, the owner of the Braves minor league team, wouldn't let him go, and the new club wouldn't pay his existing boss for his services. So, as manager he released himself as a player. Then as president, he fired himself as a manager. Then he resigned as president, and took the new job. To add to this story, the idea started from the Braves owner, Emil Fuchs. Now Fuchs suggested to Stengel as a joke to release himself as a player. Stengel took Fuchs' advice and removed himself from the rest of the organization as well as detailed above. Poor Fuchs, but he did give out good ducking advice. Was he childless and had no Fuchs to give?